So I keep pet ants, and I'm going to show you my daily routine for their care. By the way, if you want to see more of my ant colonies and short videos, follow me on Instagram, and if you want to talk with fellow ant keepers and stay up to date with how I'm progressing with future videos, join the Discord server. And this is the mini hearth formicarium from Tar Heel ants. About once a week or two, I use a blunt-tipped syringe to hydrate the nest. At the time of recording, I had a colony of cone ants, Doromyrmex bicolor, living in here. But for my other colonies that I have in these tubs and tube setups, I take a different approach. They have these things called Galileo liquid ant feeders from Biformica. Usually, it takes 3 weeks until the large ones are completely empty. For the smaller variants, about 1 week. But when you have to go away for more than a week, that's when you should rely more on adding a full test tube of water. Let me take you guys to the sink, where I'll show you how I refill the feeders.
It's pretty straightforward though. I don't know why you have to show.
Don't mind him, guys. This is my daily ant care routine, so I have to show you everything. So after screwing off the bottoms, I fill them up with tap water. My water is filtered, and I have been doing this ever since I started keeping ants. Haven't had any problems. Yet. Now that I'm done with that, I can give it back to my ants. And oh, what's that? How do I know which one goes where? Almost all of my ants cover the 3D printed parts of the feeder with substrate from their setup. So using my high IQ, I match the color of the substrate from the setup with the feeder. Basically, if there's red marks on the feeder, then it's from the colony with red sand. This colony of carpenter ants, Camponotus fragilis, also at the time of recording, were living in this setup. I gave them a lot of Hawaiian punch for their source of sugar. They are now living in one of my fortress formicariums from Tar Heel ants. And as for the container, it was cleaned out. For my other colony of carpenter ants, Camponotus sansabianus, that have since passed away, I use the syringe to spray water around their container. If you watched my Ants Australia parody video, they would dig these tunnels and sometimes nest in them. Another one of my colonies likes to hang around the top. These acrobat ants were in my DIY vivarium video and were moved because they needed more space. I often have to catch workers that escaped after opening the lid. A Q-tip is my best friend in these situations. A quick twist to get them on it, and back they go. And I had to reapply the barrier after this. With the large colonies finished, it's now time for the smaller ones. I will be going over the feeding portion now, but before that, I want to give you a quick rundown on 2 of them. Here's one colony of carpenter ants that I had raised this year. They spend a lot of time at the bottom, away from the light. Next are the cone ants that were in my mini hearth, now grown to a much larger size and doing much better. These ants do really well in these setups compared to formicariums. With that out of the way, we can now single one out and begin the feeding routine. Inside this small jar isn't saffron, but honey which I use to feed my ants. Along with it, I have parchment paper where the honey is placed. After ripping off about 10 pieces, I use a toothpick to gather the honey drops. A very slow process. Once that is finished, I give them to the hungry ants. One for the carpenters, one for the large cone ants, one escaped cone ant, and even more setups to feed. Man, this is gonna take a while. These colonies love to dig in the sand, so feeding them this honey will help a lot with their activeness. now that there are more workers, these ants have finally started to nest in the sand. And as a result, the carpenter ants have placed it all on the container walls. Luckily, the olive oil barrier is still holding up strong, so I don't have to worry about any escaping. Anyway, here's one of my dark rover ant colonies. I gave them sphagnum moss just to spice up the setup, and also because the original moss had died. Personally, I don't think this colony is doing too well, so I'll have to be feeding them more often. I would say the hardest part about feeding is just getting all the honey down on the paper, but it also makes it the most fun part about keeping ants. Sometimes I could spend an hour or two feeding and watching them, or I could spend 10 minutes at most to get it all done. However, my least favorite part about my daily routine is the cleaning portion. All I need are 2 squares of toilet paper and tweezers. Let's start off with the fortress. 1 chicken piece, 4 parchment paper, and a liquid feeder that has to be refilled. Cleaning out my ant nests is done about once every month or 2. The good thing about ants is how organized and clean they are, so it's all down to how much food you give them. For my cone ants, they use the sand to cover everything they eat. For my acrobat ants, they're one of my cleanest. The smell from leftover food can be, and I'll say this to the best of my vocabulary, quite repulsive at times, especially in the small containers that I water the most. Humidity and leftover food, that is not a good combination. Here's a cotton ball I placed in here in the last video, completely engulfed in sand. Some foods are moist when I pick them up, so it takes more time to wipe off the tweezers. And alright, now I have finished with the cleaning. 13 setups later, this is the pile I have gathered. As you can see, only 1 square is taken up. Pretty clean pets, if you ask me. Now, we have to wash our hands, refill the feeders with water, along with the one from the ant tank, and place them back. I'm deciding to give the smaller setups their own feeders too, so I don't have to always spray the setup. Next is the larger setups, and also the fortress formicarium. At the top, I would remove the stopper and spray from there also. And there we have it. That fortress formicarium is done. So we just went through 3 stages of my daily ant care routine. Starting off by giving them water, the most important aspect of their care, as the cause of most of my ant deaths were because of dehydration.
And also neglect.
Then comes the most exciting part, feeding the colonies. The main problem with this though, is that I need a lot of bugs to feed all of my ants. So I'm hoping my superworms will breed a bunch and lay a ton of eggs. And lastly, we have the cleaning stage, the most grueling and painstakingly time-consuming event that requires patience, tweezers, and toilet paper. If I were to rate these stages in order from greatest to least favorite, feeding would be on the top, hydrating would be in the middle, and cleaning would be last. and that's because I don't like cleaning. However, there's one more stage I haven't yet mentioned, that being because if you don't do this, I'm not sure why you keep ants in the first place. This can last from as short as 10 minutes to as long as 2 hours, at least for me. During this time, I often record my ants and get tons of cool macro shots, which you can also find on my Instagram, and macro photos, which you can also find on my Instagram. But before you go, let me know in the comments how long it takes you to finish your ant care routine. I would love to hear from you. Special thanks to my patrons, TechMystery, Medical Carcass 9, and Tony, the one and only. I have so many videos in store, so be on the lookout. My name is Ender Ants, another fellow ant YouTuber, and this has been my daily ant care routine.